Welcome to Into Public Interest. This is a periodic public affairs program brought to you by Bergen Community College, designed to enable you to know more about the people and programs here in New Jersey and Bergen County. I'm Jerry Ryan, the president of the college. We're here in the broadcast studios at the college. And our guest today is Phil Beachem of the Alliance, New Jersey Alliance for Action. Phil, thanks for being with us.
Nice to be here.
I really appreciate you making the trek up here to Bergen County to do this. Let's talk a little bit about you before we get into the Alliance for Action. You a Jersey person, or?
Oh yes, I was born and raised in New Jersey.
I'm finding more of them as I...
New Brunswick, born, raised in Franklin Township in Somerset County. Aside from the 4 years that I spent at college in Connecticut, I've been here my entire career.
And what was your career prior to becoming the president of the Alliance for Action?
Well, I served for many years as a legislative aide to one of the assemblymen. I ran a Chamber of Commerce in Middlesex County, and also did lobbying for the counties as well at one point in my career prior to coming to the Alliance.
The Alliance for Action is kind of historically an attempt by businessmen with a social conscience to fix big problems?
Well, the Alliance...
Tell me what the mission is. That's how I read it.
The Alliance is a very unique organization. It was created 35 years ago. Similar economic conditions that we face today. There was double-digit unemployment in the building trades. There was no funding of any kind for capital construction projects, be it transportation or buildings. The state was in dire economic conditions. And at that time, Governor Byrne was in his last year of office, decided to create a commission chaired by Donald McNaughton, who was then chairman of Prudential Insurance. And they went around the state trying to solicit ideas as to how to get out of the economic problems. And some of the ideas that were created, or at least discussed at that time, involved the investment of monies into infrastructure projects. And so a small group of people got together and said, you know, we ought to make a case for this. And that was the genesis of the Alliance for Action. It was the first time that business and labor, principally the construction trades, actually worked cooperatively at making a case. And subsequently, when Tom Kean became governor, he enacted a lot of the recommendations that had been made.
Your membership today is still primarily business and labor, people that are infrastructure interested?
The membership is pretty diverse today. It covers just about every gamut of life in New Jersey. Corporate New Jersey, major utility companies, contractors, governmental agencies, municipalities, counties, anybody or any entity that has to deal with building construction, whether it be a building or a road, is involved in the Alliance for Action.
Must be an interesting time to take a look at with money having been diverted or no longer going into infrastructure. I assume that building is probably off compared to a peak. So what does the Alliance do to try to change those things?
Well, some of the things that we're trying to do is get a handle on those issues, just how bad they are, and also to try to recommend to Governor Christie some possible solutions to it. For many years, New Jersey was the envy of other states when it came to things like transportation funding. We had a program that had been enacted by Tom Kean, Governor Kean, that maximized our ability, for instance, to draw down federal money. In some cases, we were actually able to take money that had been allocated in Washington for other states because we had our Transportation Trust Fund, and we could match the federal money, which other states could not. So we were able to essentially create a program that allowed the state to be able to do long-term planning and funding of infrastructure projects.
The planning was done, but the funding has lagged. I mean, is the Alliance interested in both mass transit and what happens on the highways, and do you have a sense of what the balance there might be in terms of funding?
Well, the Alliance has always been interested in a balanced system, including support for major mass transit improvements as well as highway and road improvements. And you know, in New Jersey, it's kind of a situation where there are a lot of people on the roads, and there needs to be more investment in both the road improvements to help the congestion issues that we have, but there also needs to be a much more robust program for mass transit support. The construction of this ARC tunnel under the Hudson River is going to allow the state to open up mass transit opportunities to parts of the state that we haven't been able to do. And I think it's an extremely important issue and one that we've supported.
The status of that tunnel is there's planning money being, or architectural design money being spent right now on that?
There's actually money being spent and there are contracts being awarded. This is a project that went from people believing it would never be built in their lifetime to where it's actually being built. And I think a lot of that had to do with the commitment that the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey made, as well as to the Department of Transportation and our New Jersey Transit, who have actually ramped up this project.
And for our viewers that don't understand ARC, could you explain that to them a little bit?
Well, the way I've explained it, so people understand it, the existing tunnel that goes under the Hudson River into New York City is owned and operated by Amtrak. And Amtrak has been starved for capital for decades. And so we have essentially, that tunnel is the middle of the hourglass. And in order to get more capacity, in other words, to get more trains from New Jersey into Manhattan, you've got to open up the middle of that hourglass. And that's what this ARC tunnel will do. It will be a completely new tunnel, wholly owned and operated by New Jersey Transit and dedicated to New Jersey Transit trains. So it will allow New Jersey Transit to run more trains into New York City, and it will allow them then to create additional service opportunities in other parts of the state.
More trains in a more efficient manner. You won't have to change trains in Newark and all that type of
Right,
stuff.
they'll be a lot more efficient. There'll be seats available so that if you're on a platform in Westfield, let's say, and the train door opens and you're standing, you'll no longer have that situation. You'll be able to get a seat.
Help me geographically. Where is this tunnel actually going to be built? I mean, it goes all the way under the river.
It goes under the Hudson River.
North of the Lincoln Tunnel?
Just north of the Lincoln Tunnel.
Okay.
And it will come out into Manhattan just a block or two underground north of the existing Penn Station.
All right, great. So you're kind of moving over to the east side.
Right.
And that must be being done on purpose in order
Well,
to...
that's a controversial issue because
Yeah.
there are many people who feel the tunnel should go directly into Penn Station, but recognizing that the tracks into Penn Station are controlled and the access to those tracks are controlled primarily by the trains service in New York City. And so we've always been the stepchild. And by having this separate tunnel access and this new platforms built, they will be controlled by New Jersey Transit.
The price tag for this is something a little gigglish.
The price tag is in the billions, as you can imagine, but I think for the first time the federal government has recognized that the commitment that has been made locally in terms of a match, particularly by the Port Authority, is so significant that, and the project's so warranted in terms of the need, that they have prioritized it in terms of grant agreements in Washington.
I was in Boston during the period that they built the Big Dig, and that ended up being a $15 billion project. So the ARC Tunnel project is kind of like the thing, the pizzazz thing that gets a lot of the press. But the Alliance for Action is concerned about more mundane things like the status of bridges and other tunnels that are decaying as we speak and haven't had anybody take a look at them. Have you got an inventory of what the problem is?
The state has an inventory. It has a pretty thorough inventory of the condition of these bridges. It is not good. And the thing that people have to understand is, you travel over a bridge, you see the upper portion that you travel. You don't see what's underneath that roadbed. And I think if people had seen or did see some of the photos of the underpinnings of these bridges, they'd be pretty reluctant
to drive across the bridge.
Drive across the bridge. Now, to defend New Jersey DOT, if a bridge was totally unsafe, they would close it. But these bridges are old. And New Jersey is one of the oldest transportation systems in the country and one of the most heavily used. And so they wear out and they are in desperate need of new funding. And bridges are one of the things that we worry about because you don't want to have a situation that happened in Minnesota where a bridge collapsed.
Right, and roads. Roads are somewhat in disrepair in the state as well.
Well, roads, again, same situation. They're heavily used. They require a lot of maintenance. And to go through a winter like we've just gone through, and now going into the spring, the potholes that you see out there today as we're taping this show are going to be dramatically worse in a matter of weeks, only because the weather is now going to take over and pop those roads up. And so you're going to see a dramatic increase in a worsening of the condition of the roads.
The roads had traditionally been funded through the gas tax, now the gas tax, New Jersey's gas tax is one of the lowest in the country, I understand.
Right. It may be the lowest. If it's not, it's one of the lowest.
And it hasn't been raised in years?
Hasn't been raised since 1988, 21 years. And despite attempts to do that, it has never engendered political support. And it has begged the question about how we pay for transportation, because we relied so heavily on that one avenue of paying for transportation improvements or road improvements, that we are now in a situation where the trust fund, the program that Tom Kane created, I talked about earlier, will be out of money next year. And so that is going to impact not only our ability to fund projects statewide, it also is going to impact local aid as well.
But it's increasing taxes these days is the third rail for politicians.
Right.
So is the alliance for increasing the gas tax?
We have always been for, we have always supported an increase in the gas tax as long as it's dedicated to transportation improvements.
Don't steal it for something else.
Don't steal it for something else. And
you could do it over time. It wouldn't have to be a dramatic.
You could do it over time. I mean, there have been proposals that have floated in the past, a penny a year for 10 years, things of that nature. But the problem that we face today is the amount of money that's necessary to maintain these roads that we have and to maintain our transit system is way beyond a penny a year for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so this is, and it couldn't come at a worse financial time because people are hurting. And so you have this tug of war between the ability to try to keep the cost of government down and the absolute needs that are not going to get any better of things like transportation improvements.
One of the arguments that proponents of the gas tax have used is New Jersey has the highest percentage and one of the highest percentage of pass-through travelers.
Yeah.
So that we'd be actually collecting money from people that don't live here. Interesting argument to do.
Well, we do.
Tax.
We have about a 30% allocation
high.
of pass-through traffic, which means that essentially, somewhere around 30% of the revenue that comes from people who are passing through the state. And there are people that live in New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania that actually travel over to New Jersey to fill up their tanks because the gas is cheaper.
Less expensive.
Right.
The Alliance have a sense of the current capacity and worthwhile nature, or I should say worthwhile, how good is the Turnpike and the Garden State Parkway? Those are two major investments, and lots of people get on them, but they seem to be in pretty decent shape compared to the rest of the state.
Well, our Turnpike and our Parkway, and in the case of South Jersey, our South Jersey Transportation Authority, all independent authorities, have always maintained an excellent road system. Now, they've been able to do that because they are funded 100% through the use of toll collections. But when there's a bad snowy day like we've gone through, people clamor to get on the Parkway and clamor to get on the Turnpike because they know that those roads are going to be a lot clearer than the local roads.
Of course, they get on the Turnpike, and then there's lots of other people. One of the things that I guess again is statistically true about New Jersey is there's just too many darn people driving, right? Because there's too many cars and not enough roads. So what's the solution to that?
Well, we've tracked this, and the amount of registered drivers has dramatically increased. The number of cars per household has dramatically increased. It's no longer one car in a driveway. It's 3 or 4 in some cases. The number of vehicle miles traveled has dramatically increased in the state of New Jersey among our residents. And these are all statistics that come out of the census data information. Yeah. So, I mean, the solution is try to get people out of their cars, but you have to have alternatives for people as well. If they want to get out of their car, but there's no place or there's nowhere for them to go to get to work or to school or what have you, sometimes they're forced to use it.
Well, let's talk about those alternatives, whether they're voluntary or forced, when we come back in the second half of the show. Our guest today is Phil Beachem, the president of the Alliance for Action. This is in the public interest, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Good night.
In 1990, in Severn, Maryland, the daughter of a clergyman was discovered by a music industry insider while pumping gas at a service station. The odds of her getting signed and spending 11 weeks at #1 on the U.S. singles charts? 1 in 19 million. The odds of this former church choir singer going on to sell 40 million records? 1 in 15 million. The odds of the same woman winning 6 Grammy Awards and starring in 2 Broadway plays? 1 in 75 million. The odds of this musician and performer having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 150. I'm Toni Braxton, and I encourage you to learn the signs of autism at autismspeaks.org. Early diagnosis can make a lifetime of difference.
Well, this is nice.
So, what do you want to talk to me about, Mom?
Oh, at school, do they, have any of your friends ever taken drugs, sweetie?
I don't think so.
Does anyone ever talk about drugs at school?
Talking to your kids about drugs can be tough, so you'll need to be ready. For help, visit our website at drugfree.org.
You may not know what to say, but we can help start the conversation. Learn more at supportyourvet.org.
Welcome back to In the Public Interest. Our guest today is Phil Beachem, the president of the Alliance for Action. We were talking before we went to the break about how no matter what we do, and we tried it here at the college, you just can't get people voluntarily to get out of their cars. Some people, the mayor of London, got to the point where he says, I got to do something about this. Mayor Bloomberg tried that and got almost thrown out of the city. But what are we going to have to do to get people out of their cars? Do you guys have any ideas about that?
It's a tough issue. People love their cars. It's like their second home. They get in there and they get the cup of coffee and they tune into the station they're listening to.
Get on the phone, text,
get on the
message.
phone. It's a very difficult issue. And we've had some successes over the years. You know, there was at one point an employer trip reduction program that was mandating on major employers carpooling. And that was so controversial at the time that Governor Whitman essentially put it on hold because it was just causing a lot of problems internally for companies. And I think, you know, there are possibly solutions. A lot of more people are working at home, maybe one day, maybe 2 days, whatever it might be. But it's going to be one of these issues that is extremely difficult to implement.
What about congestion pricing? I mean, I'm not, with the technology, you could clearly charge differential